With that in mind, what do you think about Moscow, the anti-air defense systems being placed around Moscow, protecting FSB, Putin's residence supposedly? What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that it is a great indicator of how anxious the leaders in Moscow and other Russian locations are to insurgent activities and activities by people who don't agree with what their governments are doing. I think a combination of special operations as well as unrest within the Russian regime is causing a lot of explosions and a lot of concern to the key leaders in many cities in the Russian Federation.
Anti-aircraft systems designed to intercept aircraft and missiles have been installed on several defense and administrative buildings in central Moscow, signaling that the Kremlin is preparing for a potential attack on the Russian capital. Photos posted on social media on Thursday show the Panzer missile system being placed on the roof of an 80-story building used by the Russian Defense Ministry. Another video shows the air defense system being raised on the roof of an educational building in Moscow's Taganka district, about 40 kilometers southeast of the Kremlin. The Russian portal Meduza also writes that the Telegram channel Moscow Calling published several videos showing the installation of Panzer S-1 system on a building at Tetarinskaya, street number 8. The building at the address on Google Maps looks like the one that's shown in the recordings. Such short to medium range anti-aircraft systems are used for defense against cruise missiles. The online publication Agentstva notes that Russian Telegram channels, including several pro-Kremlin war blogs, as well as Western intelligence specialists, have published photos of the Russian Ministry of Defense building on the Franzen embankment where another Panzer S-1 is installed. At the beginning of the week, photos circulated on Russian Telegram channels showing S-400 anti-aircraft missile systems in the Lozayny Ostrov National Park outside Moscow and in the experimental fields of Timiryazev Agricultural Academy in Moscow. Moscow authorities and the Russian Ministry of Defense have so far not commented on these reports. Another air defense complex was spotted in the Moscow region, about 10 kilometers from Putin's residence. Anton Gerashenko, advisor to the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Ukraine, announced on Twitter, another air defense complex was spotted in Moscow region 10 kilometers from Putin's residence. The video was reportedly taken on 6th of January near Zarakai village, Odintsova district. Supposedly, it is Pantsir C-1. What is going on, one wonders, stated Anton Gerashenko. The images of the anti-aircraft missile systems in Moscow emerged a day before NATO officials met at Ramstein Air Base in Germany to agree on a new military aid package to Ukraine that could include the provision of heavy tanks. The US has already pledged nearly $2 billion in further military aid to Ukraine, including the Patriot air defense system designed to protect Ukrainian cities from Russian missiles. Ahead of the meeting, trying to dissuade NATO countries from providing more advanced weapons to Ukraine, arguing they could potentially trigger a nuclear conflict. The defeat of a nuclear power in a conventional war can cause the start of a nuclear war, wrote former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev on his Telegram channel, who became a leading warmonger hawk as a deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council. Anti-aircraft missile systems in Moscow buildings appeared after Russia's series of bombings of Ukrainian cities and infrastructure, which led to numerous deaths across the country. A Russian KS-22 anti-ship ballistic missile hit an apartment block in the city of Dnipro last week, killing 45 people. Pro-Kremlin bloggers said the appearance of anti-aircraft missile systems in Moscow showed that the Russia's military leadership was now worried about attacks on its cities. This means that the leadership perfectly understands all the risks and understands that strikes against Moscow and the region are only a matter of time, wrote Alexander Kotz, a prominent Russian journalist who supports Russia's war in Ukraine. It's good to start planning instead of after the first hits. The appearance of missile defense systems in Moscow underscores Russia's lack of success in the war. Mysterious explosions occurred at military sites in Crimea, and several air bases used last month by Russian strategic bombers deep inside Russian territory. Ukrainian officials have also said they've begun testing long-range drones that can travel up to 1,000 kilometers, which could bring Moscow within striking distance. Southwest of Moscow, things are not looking good for Russia, the Russian army, and the separatists. More precisely, they look defeated and desperate. Despite the Russian propaganda that Soledar has been taken, the Ukrainian army is still in an active fight for that city, where it continues to inflict heavy losses on the enemy, primarily the mercenaries of Wagner Group. Soon, a new moral reinforcement is expected in the ranks of the Wagner Group, namely Mikhail Popkov, who's 58, and a serial killer who is currently serving 2 life sentences, said he wants to be released from prison to join Vladimir Putin's forces fighting in Ukraine. To make matters worse, his wish was heard by the whole nation, because the convicted murderer got the opportunity to talk about it on television. Popkov is a former police officer who was convicted in 2015, between 1992 and in 2010 in Angarsk and Irkutsk, Siberia, and Vladivostok in Russia's Far East. He's officially suspected of as many as 83 murders. Despite his sentence, Russian authorities have allowed state television to interview Popkov, who is nicknamed the Werewolf and the Maniac of Angar. He said he would like to be among the prisoners who are released after spending 6 months on the front line. When the presenter asked him, "What is your dream?" he answered, "To join the army. I would not hesitate to join them, despite the weather that is not the best right now. Considering my military specialization, I think it's quite in demand now," he said. Although he admitted that he would have to learn new skills. As he says, it will not be difficult for him even though he has been in prison for 10 years. By the way, the first to recruit prisoners to the front was the Wagner paramilitary formation, led by Yevgeny Prigozhin. According to his claims, 3 rounds of prisoners have already been pardoned and contracts have been signed with the 4th. Former Wagner commander Andrei Medvedev, who escaped from the group, fled to Norway and asked for asylum there, described how the prisoners were used as cannon fodder. He says he is ready to testify about the crimes of a private military company. It is known about him that he fought under Bakhmut and that he has video recordings of the executions of those Wagnerians who refused to fight. In October, Russian human rights activist Olga Romanova said that more than 20,000 Russian prisoners were sent to war in Ukraine and that Wagner recruited from penal colonies in the European part of Russia as well as the Ural region. She added that detainees who have not faced trial are also being recruited. Despite these reinforcements in the Russian army, the Ukrainian army does not falter. Great successes are recorded daily in Dnieper region, where the scattered corpses of occupation soldiers lie. A captured Russian talks about the catastrophic situation in his unit, where over 800 of his comrades died. He begs the wives and the mothers of Ukrainian soldiers to forgive him for his crimes and appeals to Russian mothers not to send their sons to certain death on the Ukrainian battlefield. The Ukrainian army is preparing for an offensive on the Dnieper. The left bank of this river is the next target of the Ukrainian army. Despite the daily Russian shelling of the city of Kherson and the surrounding settlements, where innocent civilians are killed because there are no Ukrainian units there, the Ukrainian army is deployed along the right bank of the Dnieper River in the Kherson region, where a major offensive is being prepared, which will begin immediately after receiving the announced package of military aid from the Western allies. The battle over Bakhmut are not abating. Russian forces, mercenaries, and separatists are suffering heavy losses on a daily basis. Ukrainian military repelled Russian attacks near Novoselivsk and Bilohorivka of the Luhansk region. Verkhnokamayansk, Krasnopolivka, Soledar, Krasnohora, Paraskovievka, Bakhmut, Ivanivsk, Dilyevka, Bodiane, Marienka, Pobieda, Novosilka of Donetsk region, and Malotokmachka and Stepove of Zaporizhia region. General Staff of Armed Forces of Ukraine has declared, "The battle for Soledar is still going on. Ukrainian guys do not spare the enemy. Despite the Russian propaganda, which is believed even by some Western media that Soldar fell into the hands of the Russian army, footage from the field denies it. The fighting continues despite the difficult conditions. The Ukrainian army is preparing for a counter-offensive. Those fearless fellows are in Soldar, and beneath Soldar in tunnels whose length and depth have never been fully determined. It is only a matter of time before the occupier and their separatist helpers are crushed. Fighting is currently taking place on the outskirts of the city, where the Russians are suffering heavy losses, as can be seen in the footage of the reconnaissance drones of the Ukrainian army. When all the current results are added up, the Russian offensive on Bakhmut and Soldar has only softened the defeatist state of the Russian military, which relies primarily on the Wagner Group mercenary gang and Kremlin-backed separatist terrorists, whose morale is in constant decline. Those who were mobilized in Russia a month ago remain in the background and pray to God that the Ukrainian offensive does not happen. And that offensive is expected primarily from the direction of the Kharkiv and Kherson regions. Thank you for watching us!